Good morning. My name is Angelina Carleton. I'm a legacy planner with a boutique coaching and advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills. In this legacy series, I have the opportunity to talk with various guests about how they are exploring the journey of achieving their legacy. I hope that these success stories will inspire you. This morning, I have the privilege to chat with Ronnie Maina. He is the director of TBM, a family-owned ICT business, which stands for Information, Communications, and Technology, based out of Nairobi, Kenya. And he is a next gen who has made it his mission to help steer their business through the current succession phase. Welcome, Ronnie.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So how is it in Kenya? How is the weather and how is business?
So, well, at present, I believe it's happening to all businesses across the globe. We all being challenged by the COVID season that has just extended. You know, I remember at about the same time last year when it just became a global pandemic. And we all thought it would be a couple of months. I mean, at some point we were hoping it would be maximum 3 months. And here we are from February last year, at least for Kenya when we went under lockdown.
Okay.
We are in the middle of May. So, but we've made it. I think I need to recognize that as a technology business, we are in one of the least affected industries, fortunately so.
Absolutely,
So,
because people need
yeah,
they need their servers, they need their laptops,
exactly.
they need their
Uh,
data storage.
exactly. The fact that they're working remotely, they need cybersecurity to allow staff who were not previously working and accessing critical company data from home to be able to access it. So, so yeah, the whole, I mean, look at what we're doing here. I mean, we're
It's
enjoying
amazing.
the
The
technology
benefits of,
called virtual,
yes,
virtual meetings. Yeah,
right. And the many benefits of technology. So your
yeah.
background is you were straight out of high school. There was kind of like a year or 6 to 12 months where your dad said, here's an opportunity for you. And then your future began.
Yes. So I think in the European and maybe Western states, they call it a gap year.
Okay.
And it was a gap year that was by luck. There were some challenges going on between one university intake and the next year. So yes, that 1 year I got my first full ingrained education about technology.
Okay.
And I managed to go back into college. When you finish high school here, you normally decide whether you're going to college to do a 1 year or 2 year course, or go to university to do your normal 3 year or 4 year course.
Okay.
So because it was clear that we'd have 1 year, I went to college to do a 1 year diploma in information management systems, which got me excited about technology.
Okay.
And 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 yes, the reason it was of importance is because my dad was running a technology business at the same time.
Okay.
So coincidence that this is the course you're doing, and he's practically setting up a business that will sell technology.
So is this something that you wanted to do in your gap year, or was this like dad cracking the whip?
I, I, I actually think it was not very clear in my mind then
Okay.
that I'm going to be doing technology. So, but I was given a choice. I was told either you go and do 1 year in accounting. My background then, I had some strengths that were leaning towards doing accounting, or the only other course in that college was to do the computer. So I think between the two, I felt, okay, if I have to, I'll take the technology course.
Good, good. And what a wonderful what wonderful benefit and opportunity it's been in your journey from what I've gathered thus far. And so your father is the founder then of the business, is that correct?
Yes, yes, he is.
Yes. And do you want to speak at all into his story of what it was when he decided to build it? Because sometimes these stories are rich with details of
Yes,
bringing it to
I
life.
definitely. So this was his second business. This current company, it's called TBM, Trans Business Machines in full. It was his second business in the whole technological business machines space. So his first business before that was a partnership, and it had lasted for over 10 years. It was a partnership with former colleagues. So his background is when he came into the capital city of Kenya, Nairobi, he came as a village boy. He grew up in the village, and the village is literally 70 kilometers from here. And when he had finished his high school, he also did this discussion with his mom and dad, and he said, maybe I should go look for greener pastures in the big city. And they said, why? Well, why not? I mean, you've educated yourself keenly until high school. If you remain behind here at home in the village, you're more than likely going to end up supporting us in the little farm we have here,
Okay.
or doing something that might not have really looked as having real biggie potential, right? So he moved alone from his entire siblings. I think he was the only one who came to Nairobi. Others left and went to other cities. Now Nairobi was the capital city and still is the capital city.
And it's quite a
So
bustling city.
it is. It
It
is.
is.
When you look at the region, Kenya is part of East Africa. In East Africa, you've got like 7 countries. Nairobi is probably your most dominant urban center, right? So it is a big city. It has a large commercial base, and um, yes, it can be overwhelming, I guess, if you come from a small village. But he took that challenge,
Mhm.
and then he came to the city. He knew, first of all, that he was not ready to enter the job market. So he joined a local technical college.
Okay.
Um, we normally refer to them as technicons. And he started studying on electrical engineering.
And I just
And
want to speak into a moment that that is not just a leap of faith, but it's also a change of cultures from a rural environment to a cosmopolitan, bustling city. Yes, he really had to
exactly,
trust himself.
yes,
Yes.
yes, in terms of in. And by the way, the other big thing that was happening, this is the late 60s. Um, the British, who had colonized Kenya for the previous 50 odd years, had just given independence 4 years ago, because he came into Nairobi about 1967, 1968. Kenya had just gained their independence in 1963 from British colonial rule.
So lots of
So
moving parts.
lots of moving parts, a lot of
Mhm.
excitement, lots of the promise of hope, because that's what politicians fought for when they were fighting for independence. They were more or less saying, we want to be our own nation, we want to have our own identity.
Mhm.
And I think that also permeated to the average citizen. So the average citizen, like you're saying, asked himself or herself, so I'm here, I live in a village, but it's a big city that was definitely run by the British.
Mhm.
Maybe because now they have left
Okay.
and they have handed over power, maybe
Okay.
there is something there for me to go and explore.
Sure.
So there was a lot of what people call rural to urban migration, right?
Sure. And
Uh,
so there's a change of not just lifestyle, but also a change to adapt in mindset.
totally.
Yeah.
Um, One of the, you mentioned mindsets. If you come from the village, you've grown around one community. Now in Kenya, we have over 50 different tribes. So you can imagine, like you're saying, he probably had only met up until that point one or two different communities in his life. So when you then decide, I'm leaving the village, I'm coming to the capital city, and then here you find everybody. You find British, you find Indians, you find over 20 different other communities. Yes, as you're saying, it does take a concerted effort to really adapt.
Yeah, it must have been one of the best times of his life, I would imagine, but also scary in the sense of, here we go.
I actually think the scariness or the scary part is probably what brings out that real excitement, that real commitment that I have to make this work, right? And
Absolutely.
I and the other thing you say, as you said, in the village, everything is usually very small. The number of cars, you can probably count them on one hand. They're five, they're 10. The number of dwellings. When you drive into Nairobi, I'm sure the first thing you're like, so many people, so many buildings, so many cars. So um, I think there was excitement with that decision, great excitement, and of course hope. Like you said, if you do decide to remove yourself and immerse yourself in a totally, completely new environment, you have to be the adventurous type.
Yes, yes.
Uh, you know, you have to be keen to look for challenges. Because it will be a challenge.
Absolutely. That's
Um,
that's like in America, we would say somebody left their backyard to go to the big city. And so they're no longer within the security or the comfort of what is familiar. They're like dropped in the center of New York City or Los Angeles, and they're gonna
yeah,
live life fully, carpe diem.
yeah, exactly. So so he moved into Nairobi in the late 60s. He started education. He went into a technical college. He did his electrical engineering, and as fate may have it, an American company, IBM. IBM is over 100 years, by the way. I think, if I'm not wrong, they celebrated 100 years in 2010, 2011. So they're about 110 right now. IBM was at that point a business that was present in Nairobi. Um, and I believe just because of the transition of British rule to independent Kenyan rule, um, there was now that whole let's look for talent, local talent that we can bring in,
Yes,
train on how to, yeah, train on how to sell and maintain the machines that IBM sold then.
absolutely. And
And he,
I'm sorry, they must have also seen the opportunity coming on the horizon, that with the shifts in the 70s and the 60s, that
yeah,
yeah, that things are opening up, people are going to come forward and want to capture the
yeah,
opportunity. Please go ahead.
exactly. Um, so yes, the the, the 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 beauty of multinational companies is that I think, given their variety of exposure in multiple markets, what you're saying is true. They must have seen, because of the change of governance, we also should change the way we run our operations in this country.
Okay.
We must bring on board local talent. And also, what happened thereafter, so he worked for them throughout the early 70s to the late 70s. And then the decision came again by IBM, who we call Big Blue, to disinvest from running their own office in the country. And I gather at that time, historically, it was a decision about they couldn't manage offices across the world,
Hmm.
right? If you think that they were from an American um, origin company, and they had actually put an office in a small little East African nation like Kenya,
Okay.
they must have had hundreds of offices around the world. So by the late 70s, strategy changed, and they said, let's move back to like the major hubs, and let's leave the smaller countries, smaller economies, and we're not going to leave and forget about the whole effort around the market they had.
Okay.
They're going to leave and set up local companies, local partners, right?
Okay.
So the opportunity then was him and his fellow employees came together, formed a local business.
Okay.
And by the time IBM had pulled out of Nairobi in the late 70s, they were given what is known as a partnership,
Okay.
which is basically the right to resell or the right to maintain the equipment that was already being used within the local market.
So they needed the
Right?
talent, absolutely, to
Exactly.
expand and to capture the markets.
Yes. So and that's how he formed the first major business with his fellow colleagues, and that business was called MBC. And they did a good job. They ran the business throughout the 80s. The business grew. They actually had, I think he says when they started, there were probably not more than 10 people in terms of staff.
Okay.
But by the time they had gone through 10 years, they were an entity that had employed closer to 50, 80 people, right? And he was the managing director. So he
So
was the, yeah.
go ahead, please, please. So what I was just going to say, what a journey.
Yeah, for him, I think if I was to pick the lessons he shares about that period, one, he kept a very close relationship with IBM, the company,
Okay.
right? They employed him, they took him on board, they trained him, and he worked for them for a period. Now he was running a business with other partners, but they were very closely aligned to IBM. So they focused on selling IBM solutions, they focused on repairing IBM equipment. So whatever it is, whatever the IBM introduced as a product into the market, they continued to sell and introduce the new products and support existing products. So, and their business grew, like I've said, they employed more people, and until the late 80s when they reached a point of, and maybe this happens sometimes for successful entities, they reached a point of disagreement.
Yes, yes. In the seasons of a
And
business, sure.
in the seasons of a business. And I think he says there were about five co-owners, and he was one of the main ones because some were non-executives.
Okay.
They simply came in for board meetings and could see the good revenue and the good work the business was doing. But he was the executive. He was the managing partner. And when they felt that the business was big enough, I think what he claims, they told him, the business is big enough, it can run itself.
Okay.
Right? You should jump out and come back and sit behind the scenes like us,
Okay.
right? And be a non-executive. Let's employ let's employ other people. Okay.
Okay. I wonder how that sat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So but he at that point he felt no, he was at the prime of his career. He was barely in his mid-40s. He was enjoying himself. I think there were other benefits of being an executive partner. He used to travel a lot. I think I remember that as well in the 80s. Every year he had two international trips. He was either going to head office to talk to IBM in the US, or he was taking high-end clients for visits to see certain sites in Europe. So, yeah, it always got to me like, wow, man, this is the life. And you used to escort him to the airport and would stand by and look at these planes leaving, and you're like, wow, that's the way to travel out and go far away to wherever. And as a child, you're like, okay, he's just leaving. Um, so
So there he is maintaining client relationships. And as a child, you get to see the
yeah,
adventurous world that he gets to step into and live. But at the same
yes.
time, now the politics come in.
Now the politics come in,
Dun, dun, dun.
and you're told to choose. You're told to choose. You're told to choose. Either you accept the proposition that you must take a step back and become a non-executive like the rest of us,
Okay.
and you leave the day-to-day running and the day-to-day operations to somebody that we can hire, or we can buy out, and because at that point they feel, the business is doing so well,
Right.
your equivalent percentage is not much. We'll pay you your shares, and you can, if you don't want, you can leave. So I guess he opted for the second option, and he said, no problem. I think because I want to work every day, and let me take whatever you consider my fair share, and let me move on and do something else. So, and that's how it came to be that in 1991, he now had to set up this current business. And yes, as you're saying, maybe it's an impact of his initial business. He never lost controlling stake of his business, even
Yeah.
until today,
Oh,
right?
I was just going to add that it's interesting about success, because when somebody gets to a certain level of success, it can be very hard for them to go backwards in life, because they
Yes.
know how big it can be. And then you ask
Mm,
them to shrink, and it's not
yes,
within their mindset anymore, because they know that there's more.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think that was probably the tipping point for him to say, you guys think this is enough, or you think this is sufficient. You don't know anything else. You don't know anything yet. This could be even 10 times bigger, um, with the right leadership, or if you had just allowed me to continue, because um, you're probably right. I think the whole traveling had given him this whole expectation. They say one of the best educators is just moving around.
Is
When
travel.
you travel,
Yes.
when you travel and you go and you see a business that is modeled in your same type, but you look at this business and you can see it's 20, 30, 40 times bigger than yours. Yes, you'd argue it's economies of scale. This is a small Kenyan economy and that is a big British economy, but still, you look at it and you think there's something there, because it means technology is like a heartbeat of any economy, right? It
And the
doesn't
world
matter if it's a
and
right.
the world opened up to him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he was pushed out, but I don't think he regrets being pushed out. Like you're saying, it was not out of his choice that he said, "Let me leave."
Mhm.
It was out of the circumstances of politics. But if he was to be asked today, 30 years later, I don't think he has any regrets.
I'm sure they had
Um,
a wonderful training program, and it's interesting because I think many times the rise to success is talked about, but the uneven parts of how do we manage the buyouts and the politics, that isn't covered oftentimes enough to understand that, here it comes, and it's going to come at some point when we'll be tested.
you will be tested. You will be tested. Um, so yes, and that 1991 is about the time when I was doing my gap year. Was in 1992. So really, when I was doing my gap year, he was 1 year old into his new venture, um, and any help he could get, he wanted. So I guess when I did the 1 year um, training on the various technologies, uh, halfway through actually, after 6 months, because I was doing it during the day as a classes during the day, he actually suggested, why don't you do evening classes? Because there was an option. There are those who were doing day classes because they didn't have jobs like me at that time,
Okay.
or there were those who would do evening classes. So they would work by day from 8 to 4 and then come to school or the evening classes in the college and be in college from 5 to 8 p.m., right? So
And
yes, in between I changed.
okay. And what a wonderful training ground.
Oh yes, I couldn't wish for it in a different way. You're right. Very many today. I'll give an example. Today we get a lot of letters from universities to take in fourth year students in what they call internships. And they really, I get from at least 3 different universities around Nairobi. They really try and encourage, please just take this student, they're a 4th-year student, give them a feel for what it is to work, right? And it's only 3 months. It's always a 3-month program. They don't ask you to take them forever, unless you want to keep them.
Right.
They try and convince you that they need these 3 months, and it's critical for their final grade. Remember, it's a 4th year of a degree class, and they need it for their 4th year assessment. They will have to prepare a report, and I get more requests than I can offer.
And accept, yes.
And accept, yeah. So for me, what you're saying is this: I was very fortunate because I didn't even know then that the fact that I can work, then rush to school in the evenings, I was getting a bonus, and I was getting the opportunity to really take some of that learning and maybe see how I can use it during the day in the actual work environment.
And it's such an environment of truth. That's what I call it, because the real world is the real world. And as much as books can tell us in case studies and different examples how it was maybe a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there's nothing like being in it to see that this is how you make the business work. And it is sometimes the simplest things that you have to do repeatedly, like the sales calls or the
Yeah.
receivables or the updating of, that it's the constant tasks, or retaining new talent, or hiring and interviewing. And yes. And I also just
Yeah.
wanted to highlight before we go on to the next question is, I think a part of the training is also, as a young person, absorbing, watching your dad board the airplane, watching your dad go to the airport, because that's also a part of thinking about, what it could look like, and
Yes.
what it does look like in the, so I mean, I remember
Yes.
growing up and also, watching my dad at work, and I think it's a very good and realistic reference point.
Mm. It's very true. Like you're saying, as a kid or as a child, your imagination can only take you places. So when you go to the airport, first you get this excitement that this is the place where people board this big vehicle and it goes zoop into the sky. And then you don't see or hear of them for a few days, a week, 2 weeks. And then they come back and they've got stories and they've got goodies.
Yes.
But your mind, like you say, your mind is just wondering, so what exactly happens on the other side of when that plane lands?
Right.
Um, and yes, that imagination is good. It's good for
Inspiration.
it's exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so there you are, and you've gone off in your gap year. And would you tell the short story about when you had to negotiate your initial salary with your dad?
Oh yeah. So so like I mentioned, after 6 months of full-time class learning during the day, the suggestion came that maybe you could actually be a good set of hands around the office. So why don't you move to evening class? And I was like, yeah, no problem. I think, and it was easy because we would leave home in the morning together, drive to the office, and I would work the whole day. And exactly at 4 or 3:30, I would jump out and go pick up the college bus just within close distance to the office, and get a ride with the bus to school. So after a month of working, initially I thought I would be like an intern. I would be being taught and had no justification to be paid a salary. But after a month, I realized, my God, it is work. There's a little bit of lifting here and there. I quickly taught myself some of the basics of, I think I remember that time there was an operating system called Windows 3.11.
Yes.
And we started selling the very earliest of IBM desktops and laptops with Microsoft Windows 3.0. So, of course, since it was totally new, you had to take the machine to the buyer and set it up for them. So, plug it out, plug in the cables, and teach them a little bit of how to move around, how to key in, set up a password, and so forth. So And now I felt, oh, I'm a teacher. You know, I am actually imparting skills. Oh, I means I have a billable skill.
Right.
So,
You're
so
adding
yes, then
value.
I'm adding value. I'm not just coming in as a student, you know. So that's how I then said, okay, let's have this discussion. That I think this is a job. If I was not there, you would have paid somebody, you know.
It's
If
your
I
first
was not doing it,
negotiation.
yeah,
Yes.
you would have been paying somebody. So salary, and in your mind by that time you've already got an idea where you think you fall. You know, you've you've got this figure in your head. So he's calm and he asks, okay, so no problem. What is your expectation? So and you give him the figure and he looks at you and he's like, really? You don't even have a house that you're paying for. You don't have to pay for food. You don't pay for transport. This is really just pocket money. And I'm like, no, but it's about the work I'm doing. Okay, eventually he says, that's fine. But I think it ended up with what I had asked. I think I was given almost like 20% or 25%, you know, of what I was self-evaluating, you know, expecting that this is me, this is what I'm worth. Um, but I took it with all the gratitude, and because yes, at that time I looked around, I looked at people my age. I mean, we had just finished high school, barely 6 7 months ago, and here I am earning a salary. I thought, you know, let me stop comparing myself to the working class. Let me compare myself to the just finished school. Then I'm doing okay. You know, this is a good enough salary. So yeah,
Yeah.
so it was an experience.
And I just wanted to highlight something funny that you had said that was very humorous that you, uh, you know, this is work.
Yeah,
Because I
yeah,
think sometimes when somebody leaves high school or a certain, I don't want to say sheltered environment, but then they're thrown into it. It's like, oh, this is work.
yes,
This is what my
yeah,
dad was doing when he left on that airplane to go somewhere. Yeah.
yeah.
Welcome to the sweat equity. Yes.
Welcome to actually walking around, you know, moving from office to office, coming back and typing out some emails. It's yeah, it's not class. It's not being taught. Yeah.
Right. So that's
Mm.
such a valuable experience, and kudos to your first negotiation with dad.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
okay, so then you move on to the next chapter of your life, which is,
So, courtesy of working for him, I get the opportunity about 2 years later to to apply for a job with the same company he worked for, IBM.
okay,
So, IBM was not present in Kenya at that time, but they had an office in South Africa. And in his business operations, he was working under the IBM South Africa office. Um, and how that relationship used to take place. There would be a regional manager who would fly into Nairobi, spend time with the local resellers like TBM, and there were a couple of others. Um, and yeah, so we established a relationship with this regional manager. And yes, he was also, I think, a critical mentor, because at some point he looked at me, he looked at my age, he looked at my dad, he said, you know, somewhere along the way, this could actually be, and I give him credit for it, this could actually be very important for him to realize what IBM is. You see, you as a father, you know what IBM is. You work for IBM.
mhm,
So those discussions, he went back now, the regional manager, he went back to South Africa and he put a case and he said, listen, I have many partners across sub-Saharan Africa. He was looking at East Africa. I think he had like 6 7 countries under his region. And then he had a fellow regional manager looking after West Africa. So he went and he said, I think it would be of benefit if we looked at some of our partners and picked talent that was inside those partners, brought them here to Johannesburg, South Africa, trained them. So it was almost meant to be like a trainee program. Trained them about IBM policies, IBM procedures, um, then sent them back, right?
mhm.
So in his proposal to the management for the region, they found it very interesting. They're like, wow, that's a brilliant idea, right? Because it'll also give us a way of like looking at how we pass over, hand over skills. So I was project 001 in that particular case. I was the first one to be recruited from any of the different regions. And yeah, 2 years later, I was on my way for at that time when I left Nairobi, it was for a six month to 1 year training program. And yes, going back to the experience of my dad in 1967, 68, from the village to Nairobi, I really felt Nairobi to Johannesburg. Johannesburg is a much bigger city. Secondly, I'm living home, right?
Yeah.
I've been staying under my father's roof, and now I'm going to stay as an independent young man, you know? So the adventure and the excitement was all running around my head at that time that I'm finally getting the chance to lead my life. Yeah.
I was going to add that it's a very exciting time, but I think also I just wanted to highlight two things that in some ways it was like you were walking in your father's footsteps energetically, because he left the kind of the what was familiar to a bigger adventure, and here you
Yes.
are doing the same. And I also
Yes.
wanted to highlight that how valuable it is when our parents can be mentors and guides, because how honest they're going to be, even if it's brutally honest, with
Yes.
their guidance and advice and ideas and thoughts, which is much needed, because as a young person in a big world, sometimes, you know, we don't know the answers. We want to sometimes run to the middle of the football field and catch the football, but we don't know the rules of the game yet.
Yeah, yeah. Excitement can overrun your enthusiasm, and you make big mistakes. You're
Yes,
very right.
yes.
Right. So their guidance and their calming you down and putting some patience in your enthusiasm is always appreciated. Um, Most especially, like you're saying, if they've walked that journey, and most parents, they have. Whatever it is as a child you're experiencing in your teens, in your late teens, in your early 20s, trust me, your parents have, they've probably gone through it. They know, and hence the advice and the hand holding that they're still giving. So yeah, so that was the beginning of another adventure for me, where the initial 6 to 1 year contract ended up being, I think I worked for IBM from 1996 to 2003, right? And so that was what, 8 years. It was quite a period, and I also got to do the things I had seen my father doing. Being based in IBM South Africa, I got a role to be a regional manager. So there was a period in my life there between 1998, 99, 2000, 2001, where I was literally traveling once every 2 months.
Wow.
And I was touring the whole of Africa. I was going to head office, which is, of course, IBM in the US. I was going to IBM Europe. So I was doing what I had actually imagined or seen happening back when I was a young boy.
Good, good. So what would you say were some of the challenges that you faced, whether it was micro or macro challenges and obstacles?
So during the period when I was working away or working for the big blue, or during what period?
Anytime in your
Okay,
journey, what were some of the
okay.
challenges that you faced?
So for one, I think one of the big ones for the period I was not based in Nairobi, I don't call it a challenge, but it was more of a common thought that kept creeping back was, at some point I need to go back. You
Mm.
know, at some point I need to go back. So here you are, and the longer you stay, the more comfortable you become within the corporate setting. within the corporate environment. So I would be enjoying the extra benefits of being an employee of a global corporation like IBM, the better pay, the share options. Now you're really beginning to feel conflicted because you're like, but this journey is really rewarding. It's rewarding. I like the independence. I even went as far ahead as getting married in South Africa. So I even found a bride while working in this different country. So, but at the back of your mind, one of the things that keeps creeping up is you do know at some point you need to go back, right? It wasn't anything he had told me prior to leaving. He didn't say, listen, man, you go, but make sure you come back. There was no discussion like that. It was more like, yeah.
Was it that you missed home? Was it about loyalty? Was it about returning to your roots?
I think it was about loyalty.
Okay.
I didn't miss home per se because I think I had found a new home.
Okay.
I had settled down, I had made new friends, I had even found a bride and we got married and it was more of where did this all come from? Where did it start? It started from supporting and being part of a family business, right? So the question will always arise when, like, I remember when I left one job, IBM, and I got hired to a similar role at Microsoft.
Okay.
And I looked at the pay I was looking at, and I could tell, I don't even think my dad pays himself such a salary. I don't think he pays anybody in his company, you know? And I was like, so what will happen the day I actually decide to give this up? Right? I'll have to
Yes.
give this up and go back, and out of loyalty, out of commitment, out of this is where the company that started when I was there at the beginning as well, when it was less than 2 years old. This is where the future lies, you know? So it remained that was one of the thoughts that remained with me throughout. I mean, I stayed out of the business, working with the business from 1996 to 2010. So that is almost 15 years.
That's a
But
very,
it remained,
I'm
right?
sorry. I'm sorry. I was just going to say it's a very interesting conversation, that internal conversation.
Yes. So, and I think it would happen with any well-educated member of a family business that has really become successful. Wherever they are in the world, I do not think they can totally detach themselves from the fact that it is family that put that together. It might be
Right.
first generation, it might even be second generation. It is family that is really growing something that has succeeded. For it to grow and move maybe even to second generation, if that generation is sitting well educated in Australia, in Canada, or in the US, they will still carry that. You know, all this happened. I'm here, yes, and I'm probably happy that I live in this particular state or country. But
Mhm.
all this started from people who have never lived outside that country, that small country, and they managed to educate me. They managed to send me here. They made sure I got an education, and now I have a job. So, what do you do with that? You know, like you said, loyalty is always there. Do you ignore the loyalty and say, no, I'm independent? I
Well,
am
there's a,
independent.
I have to wonder if there's a sense of a little bit of guilt as well as kind of something around contribution and being able to give back because you've gone out to the world and been blessed.
Yes, yes, and and it was from the hands of your own family. It was your grandfather, it was your grandmother, it was your father, it was your mother. So yeah, so that was always there. So two. Secondly, um, because of that, and I'm now tying them together. Whenever I went out to visit similar businesses, so because of my job, I was able to travel to West Africa, Southern Africa, and spend time, quality time with other business owners, other founders, just like my dad, who were running very similar businesses. And it was a good time because I could actually see what made them successful. And when I found those successful critical factors, the only person I would think of sharing with, guess what? Look, this founder in Botswana has this strategy to doing his business, or this founder in West Africa, Ghana, implemented this tactic in managing his people, and I can see it's giving him great reward. I would always think of let me call him, let me send him an email, let me share, because I want him, I want the family business, I want it to grow, I want it to succeed, and yeah, so that was another part of my tour, my traveling, and my meeting other similar business owners in
Your
the
journey.
region.
Your journey.
Yeah, and exactly.
Yes.
So that was part of it. I think then the big challenge then after all that 15 years was coming back home, and when it was going to happen. If you asked me after 5 years, I didn't know whether I was going to spend another 10 or another 2 because there was no certainty. So the event of when I made the decision to come back, I was now working in another country in Africa. It's called the DRC. And I was running a ISP, Internet Service Provider, South
Okay.
African Internet Service Provider that had just set up an office. I had employed 40 people. I interviewed all 40 people. I found an office, and we're now rolling out a new service to the residents of the capital of DRC, is Kinshasa. So I'm there and I'm enjoying it. I'm just, I'm feeling like now I'm actually testing myself in running a business. It's the first time I've been told, go run an operation entirely by yourself. And it was about a year into it, and he called me. He says, yeah, I can see you're doing well, you're happy. My question to you, how long am I going to wait? And I'm caught aback, and I'm like, you wait? Yes, how long am I going to wait? You know where this business has come. Now he's talking about his business, right? You know where this business has come from. It's growing, it has grown. I'm not getting any younger. I think at that time, if I'm not wrong, around 2010, he was about 70 years old.
Yeah. And I
So
just wanted to highlight, it's interesting, the internal conversations that you're having throughout this journey, but also the external conversations. So you've gone out to
exactly,
the world, and you've garnered this tremendous, vast, rich experience, professionally speaking, at different companies and different roles and wearing different hats. And now this conversation with dad again.
exactly, which had always been at the back of my mind, like it's gonna come, it's coming, it's somewhere.
Dot, 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 dot. Yeah.
So, so he, it's very difficult to say no to him. And the truth is, I didn't have a permanent job. I had a contract. My job was to get in, hire, run the farm for 2 years, and then they told me we'll see. So I was also on a contract. So when he called, I said, yeah, well, he has a point. I have my family living back in South Africa. I'm now doing anything and anything outside to yes, of course, enhance my career. But his point is valid. A 70-year-old running a tech company in this day and age, I mean, yeah, it's not going to be that easy. So I told him, okay, look, Dad, let me think about it. And I think I resigned within 3 to 4 months from that discussion.
Okay.
And back in Nairobi from around 2010. And that was now me coming back and now having the next major negotiation, which, you're talking about negotiation earlier.
Negotiation number
like,
2.
yes. So what is my role, right? And are you ready to hand over whatever you consider my role is? Because he was still running the business, and he had a partner. He had my mom, who was also a partner. The three of them were the main decision makers in the business. And then,
Right.
yes, and then my brother had an older brother who was a sales director. So where am I meant to fit in? Am I meant to fit in as your deputy, or are you guys going to create a new role for me? Because I don't think I should come in and be told that I'm now not a manager of people or something. I think I've got the track record.
Right.
So
Right.
so then that became a negotiation, and eventually I ended up in the same role I've been doing now, which is more like the strategy slash operations director. Um, and I've been doing it now from 2011. It's literally 10 years.
It's interesting because on one hand, that bond with parents is so strong, and you'd have to know that your dad is kind of watching you as your career progresses and advances out there, and keeping tabs like, oh, my boy's doing
Yeah,
really well. It's just a matter of time before he comes home.
yeah, very
So,
true.
so you worked through the second negotiation, and so now
Yeah.
you are here at this moment of time, and I understand that communications with other founders and other next gens are incredibly vital to you to understand, what is it that they are facing. Would you speak into that need for community?
Yeah. So very, very true. After that negotiation, which was simply, I need to have space within the existing um, decision making and operations of the business. The next discussion then is, so, but where are we going? And what's your plan? And how do I fit in? And can I, help in that direction? So it wasn't evident in the first, I think the first 2 3 years I was just settling down and trying to show that I could bring in new ideas and steer direction strategically towards um, uh, activities of revenue that could bring return.
Mhm.
Eventually then it becomes okay, um, you're alive now, but you might not be for longer, right? And you're aging, so what happens? How do we take this business and hand it over? Do you want to give it to an individual? Because right, there's two people now in the family, in the business, me and my brother, but he has other children. Or do you want to create a structure, a
Mhm.
holding that will allow succession beyond your immediate children to your grandchildren? So those are now discussions that he he he's not a man of many words, but occasionally he will sit down and he'll explain that he doesn't think this should be hand over to me and my brother, right?
And those
That's
are,
that's not,
yep, and
yeah.
those are really important conversations.
Yeah, so I think, like I mentioned, occasionally he would sit us down and say that his vision is not to build a company and leave it for his immediate children. It goes beyond that. His vision is that the business should actually go beyond just me and my brother, and hopefully get to his grandchildren. And and I think around the same time, in one of his business, not business trips, I think in one of his, he started taking occasionally, I think once every 2 3 years, he take a trip with a group of his friends. And one of the more powerful trips he had was to some community in Ireland. And they were on a golfing trip with some friends, but they went through to the village and did a tour, and they got to see how the village setting still existed, um, and the businesses, as much as those small corner drinking pubs and small village stores, had been passed through 3 4 5 generations. And so a little bit of inquisitive and sharing of stories plants a little bit of seed in him. It gives him, so if these people can actually be running businesses that were there 200 years ago, um, and by members of their family, it is possible,
It is
right?
possible. It's social proof.
Exactly. So, and I think that's how he'd come and then say, if it's possible, what should we do? And that's a good question to pose, because he's actually admitting he might not know what the actual answer is and how it should be done, but he's saying it is possible somewhere else in the world, so try and we should try
Plan
and put
for
in
it.
place. Exactly.
Right. And it's interesting also because when you were at IBM or Microsoft, some of those larger multinational companies, they've got a much larger network. And so now you come back and it's how do you create from where your family business is at? Because your family business might not be a global
Yeah,
publicly traded company.
exactly. So that's actually very true. So for me, as we had those discussions, so two things came out of it. One, I need to explore what you've just mentioned now. I had, and I still have a hold of contacts of people I met 15, 20 years ago when I was traveling around the continent. But what have I done with it? Um, Before I came, yes, I had used those contacts to get me a contracting job in DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. But since I came to a Kenyan-based business, and I have had very little interaction with businesses outside East Africa, there are people I've not spoken to for so long because, like you're saying, there's been no need to build, connect, and see how we can interact with them on a business level.
Right.
So, but it starts bringing
Synergies.
that exactly, no synergies. So it starts bringing that also to the fore. So are we going to continue as a Kenyan-based business only? Um, Technology being technology, people using technology to shrink the world into a village, like we all call it a global village. What's our role going to be?
Right.
So yes, two things came out of that. One, I went and joined the African Leadership University, a brand new university that was formed in Kigali, Rwanda, and they they set up an MBA. And just by the description of the MBA, they captured my attention. Theirs was simple. We are going to take individuals from across the continent. So in every yearly intake, we have to get members of 20 plus countries. So we're going to take these individuals, we're going to bring them together, we're going to throw at them the challenges that we are facing as Africa. And I bet you there are similar challenges. What is afflicting West African countries around poor leadership is probably the same issues afflicting us here in the east side of Africa. And
In terms of the landscape. And also, I would have to imagine that part of the family business, one would have to think about branding. If your branding is different than IBM and Microsoft, how do you approach brand new, what I might call strategic alliances? And, here's what I can bring, here's what you can bring, here's how we can work together. Because it's you're coming from a different platform. And then how do you explain it? And then also, what is it that you would want your business to stand for as part of those discussions ahead of time?
exactly. So I guess what you're saying is what is the unique value that we bring if we're going to go to a neighboring country? Because just like my role was when I was working in Microsoft and IBM, my role was to find 20 similar companies in the 20 different countries. So there was TBM in Kenya, but there was another 19 TBMs doing the same thing. They would buy the products from the Microsoft or IBM, they would resell the product, they would support the product. So you no longer you no longer have any unique identifier. I guess that's the point.
Well, it's
And
interesting. It's interesting because one of the challenges that I imagine many family businesses face is who are the competitors, and how do you stand out
yeah,
in creating trusted relationships in the marketplace, whether it's with the customers, with the vendors, and yeah, how do you? And I'm not expecting you to answer that on this in this conversation. I'm just bringing up that. It's a brand new landscape when you get to go home to dad and he's handing you this gem,
yeah.
this jewel.
And
No pressure.
no, it's true. And his vision is to grow it, of course. And when you look at it from the point of view of where he started at zero, ground zero, to where he has reached at that point was 20 years old, you can see it has really grown. So the question also when you're coming in is, could I do that same percentage of growth? You know, could I achieve that 1,300 growth in the space of 20 years? Well, if it is possible, it will not be within the same size market, and it will not be doing the exact same things. We'll have to figure out how to do bigger things.
Sure,
Right?
and where the need is. Yes.
And where the need is. So that now has been part of the strategy. And as I mentioned, I figured that maybe joining like-minded students who are working within their own environments in West Africa, North Africa, Southern Africa, East Africa. And so we joined African Leadership University School of Business, and we did a 2-year MBA. And it was an amazing refresh. For me, it was an amazing refresh. I think I saw a lot of the excitement I had when I first left Nairobi to go to Johannesburg. We used to meet because it was in Kigali, but we used to meet every 3 to 4 months for what we called an intensive session. So all of us would fly in from our our home countries, would meet and would spend a week, and it would be 7 hours every day in class, 7 hours every day, but really intense. So but the sharing and the networks, I think you mentioned that the networks was amazing. I mean, right now we have a right.
Yeah, I think the support is also essential, so you don't feel like an island out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you feel like if you want, like today, I'm thinking I want to go into DRC. I want to go into Ethiopia. I'm actually saying, but I have some people I can call. You know, and I know them well enough to consult with them, to seek their input. They might not be in my line of business, but they have a way that we understand each other and they can guide me. So
Absolutely.
so that was one. And then of course the other one is, as I mentioned, was what is known as the Association of Family Business Enterprises, AFBE. It was set up and launched in Nairobi in I think around 2017. I heard about it and I immediately joined. And again, at that point, the interest was, so this is an association where family businesses are going to come and join as members, and they're going to share.
And
They're
exchange
going
those
to share,
ideas. And they would also,
exchange those ideas.
those members would understand the pressures that you would walk in and have to walk through, the daily pressures
Exactly.
of everything that comes with the position of being a next gen that's going to take on and lead a business that someone else had started, and their vision, and that vision might be the same as yours, it might be different, because again, the landscape is changing so fast that, you know, if you would have asked your dad back in the 60s or 70s, would you imagine what it would be to have, you know, these smart cities? It probably would not have even
Yeah,
been a part of his imagination yet. And so when we see how
totally.
fast technology is changing, it's both an opportunity as well as uh yeah, it's a
You're very right. It's that whole transformation that brings a little bit of thought process to this. Why should you hand over? It's because if you remain with your historical successes and what you achieve, it has no guarantees that you will still be able to see through the next 5 years. And that's why you
absolutely.
want these younger people, right? Um, you want to involve your children because there's a distinct age gap between you and them. Firstly, you know, there's a 30-year age gap, and they probably are seeing things in a slightly different way. You know, you've got your way of seeing things. You've built your business in a certain way, but yeah, it might need a slight bend here and there,
And the nuances.
um, and the nuances.
Yeah.
Um,
So
so
It's interesting because a big company, a big multinational might do well, but I'm also seeing that smaller, nimble, fast moving teams will do well in this economy. If there is one insight that you could share with the next gen, what might it be?
So for me, with the next gen, I think it's just to keep close to the founder
Okay.
and keep that line of communication open. I think sometimes they say we next gen, we younger generation have impatience and lack of appreciation of what really brought the business to where it is. Um, so to get that patience and to get that little bit more detail, they have some huge business acumen. They never went to business school. Um, they never studied for MBAs.
Right.
But trust you me, for them to hold on to a business and make it grow for 20 plus years, they have got some serious skills.
They do, because that's operational.
That's operational.
Right.
They probably also good at networking. They have made some decisions about who to pursue in terms of their network of friends. And those are things, if you're not too observant or if you don't ask, you might just assume it happens naturally. No, you know,
Yes.
I think they 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 can tell you exactly what they had in mind 20, 30 years ago
At
when they
each,
said, I'm going to build a business. Yes, and the steps. So, and for us, I think here, especially in this part of the world, in Africa, we are, they say our culture had very, very poor documentation.
which happens in many
When
indigenous cultures.
indigenous cultures. So you go back and they say that the way knowledge was passed down, the way teachings were passed down, values was orally,
Yes.
was through sitting down around a table in different setups. There's the elders' council where the men would sit and talk. Then, depending on your age as a young man, they would assimilate you to a temporary elders' council and eventually into. So, those, but it was oral. I think the main point there is that it was through talking and sharing. Now, if you don't give them the chance to talk to you, because you're so caught up with the internet and YouTube clips and very few of our founders in this day and age have written some of those really valuable tips and tricks to running a business. So the only way
Right.
you get it out of them is consistently looking for the chance to sit down and ask questions, look for the chance to talk, to have a meal, um,
And to
maybe
give,
even go as far as some of their friends,
mhm.
right?
And I was going to add,
Yeah.
and to extend that respect.
And also, it's a very respectful thing, like you mentioned, when you go up to anybody and you say, hey, you know what? You're my elder, whether it's your dad or his friends or your uncles. You have some great knowledge and experience. I'd really just like to spend time with you.
Yes,
I
we
don't
have
think
to,
there's any other better compliment, you know?
absolutely. And it deserves more respect than, yes,
Yes,
yes.
this that gadget is going to detach us so much, and we're going to lose a lot. The mobile phone, like you quite rightly noted, is deceptive in the way it makes you think you can access somebody anytime.
Right. Or
The,
get the
the,
full
the, the
picture.
whole, or get the full picture. The whole ceremony, like you said, of calling somebody and saying, I want to see you, and going to where he or she is, not calling him and then say, do you have a minute? No, it's that whole, like you said, it's respect. If I
Right.
remove myself from my own house or office and I call and I come to you, whether you're at home or in the office or wherever you want us to meet, and I sit down and I spare an hour just to listen and ask and listen.
Mhm.
I think it's much more impactful to do that than to pick the phone and
It,
try and chit chat, you know?
right. It's genuine. I know, for example, in my mother's culture, they want to see someone face to face, look them in the eye, because they feel like anybody can write something down. But if you can look somebody in the eye, then it's
Mm.
a that trust feels so much closer, and then they will open up. But so on one hand, it's great to understand that. On the other hand, if the next gen choose to not take the time to do that, then the knowledge can get so easily lost.
That's I think the greatest one of those fears that uh, I'm seeing right now. And if that is one advice I could give, like you asked, it is if you're seated in Europe comfortably and enjoying the freedoms of having developed your career, but there's a big family business uh, that has no proper succession.
Right.
um, maybe take some time out. Maybe you might eventually sell it. Who knows? You might decide, hey, Dad, my life is set. I'm staying. But maybe take some time out just to come back and try and hear him out or hear your uncle out, just to understand their journey. I think there's massive lessons, whether or not you retain the family business, even just for your own life. Your life skills. Um, so connection, I think you said that's a good advice I would give to any next one. Try and connect. Try and connect.
Okay. And to kind of round out this wonderful conversation, what would you say is the best part of being in a family business right now? And also, what would you like your legacy to be? Which I realize
Okay.
is a big question, but it's good to think about it now compared to, in the fourth quarter.
It's true. So I think the best part right now of being a family business is um, they, I think they're the more resilient businesses during challenging times like we are going through now. Um, I look out there and I look at some of the big businesses. It's inevitable if they were in hospitality, they have probably sent home half the staff, right? But even those that were in industries that were least affected, they still went through a process of let's just cut. Um, we are not a big entity. We don't have 500 or 1,000 staff. But even the aspect of we need to send people home was something we really avoided, right? And we avoided because we felt like all these people that work for us are almost like family members.
And you care.
Um, and we care about them. So the furthest we went, because we didn't send anybody home, was to have a discussion of if it gets to that point, we should actually all consider to take a pay cut. And it was through employee surveys and some broadcast webinars between me and the entire staff. And yes, majority were actually, yes, okay, it's fine. Yeah, if the company cannot meet all its commitments, but we still wants to retain all of us, then fine, let's all agree that we will all participate in a salary cut for a temporary period. So for me, resilience has been showcased, I think, more by family businesses during this last 1.5 years. And I hope through that, we will be able to see through the next, I don't know, this pandemic, like we have said, I don't know, is it going to last 6 months? Is it going to last another year? Um, let's just hope we'll be able to see through however long
Yes.
it takes.
Yes.
And then from a legacy perspective, I think if I could impart on the next generation, just some of those strong principles, strong values of the founding generation, I think I would have done a good job because they, apart from the bravery, we go back to the beginning of this discussion. Apart from the bravery of leaving a small village to come to the urban city, they, to a large extent, were successful. They persevered through a lot of challenges. Sometimes I look and I think we're going through some of the most difficult challenges right now. But then I'm reminded of, but do you remember what happened in 1980 in the Kenyan context? Do you remember drought in this period? So they were there, and they made it through, and they gradually grew their own careers and their businesses. So those lessons, like we said, if I could just capture them, because I know they're not written anywhere now, and I've been saying this is exactly what I was even telling. I had a discussion about a year ago with my nieces and nephews, and I asked them, "Do you all understand the family tree? Do you know? Can you go back on your mom's, on your mother's lineage and your father's lineage, how far back can you go? What do you know of your great 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 grandfather? And I said, there's technology today that can allow you to capture little bits and sticks of stories, which
And
you will be able to then store
mhm,
technologically, and it will be there permanently for generations thereafter. So, so I think we are at that stage where I need to kind of figure out what is the best way to capture some of those really valuable stories
in the
that
knowledge and the humanity.
and the knowledge,
Yeah.
capture them so that they can be transitioned down,
Mhm.
and in a manner where, yes, even the great grandchildren, I don't know if I'll have, and if I do, will have a good idea of who their grandfather was, or
And
great
those
great grandfather, and right,
and those roots can
yeah.
be
So,
strengthened.
and those roots can be strengthened. I think
Yeah.
the other reason I say this is the whole colonialism had an impact that was not really positive in terms of culture and heritage being passed on. So they they moved people around. They destroyed some of the practices that we did. So it's and then of course we moved out of the village, or rather, my father left those practices and cultural norms, came to the urban city. What happens in the urban city? You said it. It's a melting pot. You
Sure.
have 20 to 30 different communities. You're living with them, neighbors who some probably can only communicate with them in English or Swahili. Swahili is the local language here. But then you speak less and less of your own mother tongue or dialect, because the neighbor and the other neighbor are not from your home village. And what
Yeah.
happens to your children? They then speak less and less of your dialect, and now they become more dominant in speaking English and Swahili. Um, so that's just an example of how language just becomes eroded, since we're no longer living in the rural setup and we're living now in the urban village or urban city. So, but that's just language. What about all those other wonderful things that we missed out? You said knowledge.
Right. You don't want
Um,
it to vanish.
I don't want it to vanish. So if I
Yeah.
could, just to give you a straight answer on my legacy, if I could participate in somehow conserving it a little bit longer and making sure it can be passed down, I'll be a happy man.
That's beautiful. That's very beautiful. What value do you think you get to honor? And then I'll wrap up our chat. If there could be one value or a few.
Oh, one value. One value for me is empathy.
Okay, beautiful.
Um,
Okay.
Empathy is, as you said, just being able to feel uh, for the next person, for the next generation, and see how to encapsulate that in, if it's in the business, if it's in the stories, if it's in the values. Yeah, so I would say empathy would be prime for me.
Lovely. Thank you,
Yeah.
Ronnie, very much for sharing your thoughts and being a positive role model of one success story, another success story of someone that is defining, developing, and executing their life legacy. And I especially liked how you spoke into what I would call the glue of love, of when if there has to be a pay cut, that the love within the family business prevails so that the whole group can stay together, employees,
Mm,
non-family members, and so forth, because I
mm,
think that that adds to the culture of a company. And I think that's one of the reasons why family businesses do so well. It's because of that high
mm,
vibration of love that can transcend obstacles and it can transcend market cycles, because it is about those trusted relationships. So thank you so much. And I appreciate,
thank you.
again, your time.
I'm very grateful for the opportunity. And yes, I hope to continue following your podcast and listening to other founder next gen stories as well.
Okay, delightful. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Ronnie.
Thank you.
Okay,
Okay, bye.
bye bye.